Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7. Our studio is right here in the center of Jerusalem, and welcome to another episode or another program of Middle East Review. With me, as usual, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Eran Lerman, former senior intelligence officer, colonel, and educator, and many, many other things, publisher.
Grandfather.
Absolutely. So, Iran, I think we are now, this is a special review since we have seen things happening. Since our last program, we have seen a major development, and that is that we have now some kind of hiatus in this Herculean campaign or Herculean conflict between the good and evil in the Middle East. The axis of evil, Iran mostly, but also Hezbollah and Hamas, the Houthis, have been dealt a major blow, almost devastating blow from Israel and the United States and the allies, but they are down and not out yet. And we see, although right now there is a ceasefire in Lebanon, there is a ceasefire in Gaza, the Houthis are also quiet. In Syria, we see that Al-Julani or
Ahmed
Shara, the Syrian-backed militia, non-de-guerre is Al-Julani. Ahmed Shara is cementing his control in Syria, although nothing is yet, of course, certain. And here we are, and Israel is preparing for the next stage. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington for a very, very crucial meeting with President Trump to actually see how we move forward. So in that stock taking, Iran, how do you see the next phase, what it should be and how it would be, especially in light of the meeting in Washington between Trump and Netanyahu? What should come out of the meeting, or what will come out of the meeting?
No, clearly, the dominant aspect of the new situation emerging is the completely different manner in which the new American administration approaches practically every issue. And it's not just a question of what they used to say in America, ABB, anything but Biden. And when Biden came in, it was ABT, and he annulled many of the actions taken by Trump.
When Bush came in, was ABC, anything but Clinton. Yeah.
Right. Basically, this is a completely new approach to governance and a new approach to the role of America in international affairs. It's much more aggressive on one hand. It's much more transactional on the other hand. It is much less, focused on preserving the post-1945 order, and it is acutely focused on Trump's perception of American interests. And it's troubling to many people around the globe. We've seen already the beginning of very coercive actions vis-a-vis Denmark, Canada, Mexico, China, obviously. But perhaps from an Israeli point of view, it's reassuring to know that in the mindset dominant in the new administration, as well as for many others in Washington, Israel is an essential part of the landscape of American interests. It's true that there are people, of course, on the hard progressive left and the hard nationalist right wing in America.
The isolationists, if you take it all the way.
Isolationists and some of them proto-fascist. People who think Churchill was to blame in World War II. People like that don't consider Israel a friend and ally, but these are the edges, the margins of American political life. the mainstream is in a different place, and we are seeing changes, dramatic changes. And the fact that Netanyahu is the first international leader to be invited to the White House is in of itself a very significant indication.
Especially when Trump is so much busy with changing domestic policies in Israel. He started with a real array
In America.
In America,
Right.
with all those, I think, over 180 presidential executive orders to change things in terms of the immigration and inflation,
The number
and
of
energy,
genders.
and of course everything else. And yet, within the first 2 weeks of his reign in power in Washington, D.C., he has time to have a very, very thorough meeting with Netanyahu. I think this may be boding well for the fact that not only he is interested in what's going on here, I think he wants to help.
Yes, I would say that it's actually the coming together of three issues which are not in and of themselves interrelated, but in the manner they are structured now, they are part of what is becoming a package that Israel would need to decide about, not without serious political difficulties at home, but that's another matter. And I would put them in what I think is the right order. First of all, action against Iran. The recent reporting that the weapon group in Iran, that's to say the scientists and engineers charged with solving the problem of tooling enriched uranium military
Actually completing a
military
warhead,
grade
a nuclear warhead.
into a warhead that can be actually delivered by a ballistic missile, for example. If I was on the Iranian side, I wouldn't trust the Air Force to go anywhere. But to tool them for a ballistic missile, and to turn what has been already produced into a weapon, now on an intensive effort to break through or they used to call it a breakout towards a military capability. I've heard Zarif, now Vice President of Iran, saying, well, you've been saying 6 months since the 90s. Well, at some point, yes, and the Iranian program has been delayed by all sorts of actions,
overt and covert, yes.
Overt and covert and diplomatic. But at the end of the day, at one point, it is coming closer and closer to maturity. And all his verbal maneuvers cannot hide that fact. So this is going to be a decisive aspect of the next weeks and months. We're not talking years anymore. We're probably not talking a year anymore.
Mm-hmm. So, Eran, before then...
So that's number one.
Yeah.
And it's interrelated with the Saudi package. Actually, more or less the first achievement of the Trump's foreign policy, basically before the ink dried on some of his executive orders, was to gain a promise from the Saudis, from MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, to invest $600 billion over time in the American economy. Now, here's an interesting thing. When I used to tease my students, I used to say, you know who is the U.S. Secretary of Industry? No, you don't, because there is none. Mm-hmm. The United States, unlike Japan, unlike the key European players, certainly unlike China, does not have an industrial policy as such. Mm-hmm. And therefore there's no secretary either. You have a Secretary of Commerce, because that involves relations with other countries and interstate relations, but there's no industrial policy. And with the sole exception of the New Deal era, administrations do not have that tool other than directing big money into strategically placed projects such as the military or the space project or some of the green initiatives under Biden that are now being scrapped. So how do you bring big money into the right sectors of the American industry, those that would make America competitive with China?
Especially infuse money into the industrial military complex that Eisenhower was warning against back in 1960, 61.
Yes, but that actually, the military is always at the cutting edge of technology. It has to be. So that's one good way of encouraging advanced technology.
Right.
The other is to bring someone else and suggest to them that they should invest, for example, in AI. And the DeepSeek shock in America was very much part of the story here.
Which I hope will be short-lived, because I think the Chinese are, again, not being truthful to say the least, maybe just downright cheating, but we'll see.
I don't know. A friend of mine just sent me a conversation he had with DeepSeek, and it immediately recognized the Jewish sources of his quote from Hillel the Elder. I mean, unbelievable. But the bottom line is America needs to push forward, not by investing huge amounts of federal money, but by bringing in huge amounts of foreign investment. So the Saudi position is, of course, they are transactional as well. They know what they want from the United States. They want a treaty. And no treaty with the United States would go through without an Israeli angle.
Yeah. And they also want, albeit civilian, nuclear reactors.
Possibly. But they also want a defense treaty.
Right.
And no defense treaty can go through 67 votes in the Senate without ratification, without an Israeli component, a normalization component.
Exactly.
So that's item number 2. And it's, of course, related to the Iranian question, because the Saudis fear Iran more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And into this mix comes also the question of the fighting in Gaza. And the Trump administration is seemingly in a self-contradictory position. On one hand, end the war, bring all hostages back, carry through the second stage of the hostage deal, which I think Netanyahu is increasingly inclined to do because of the immense reverberation of positive reverberations of the releases until now in Israeli society. Right. The bitter impact of seeing Hamas standing in formation and spouting anti-Zionist slogans and all is marginalized. The main effect in Israel is this uplifting sense that we are seeing women and men coming back. And so I think but the question for Netanyahu is, how does he keep his coalition? And the question for Israel down the road is, how do we get rid of Hamas?
And maybe he will not keep his coalition. Maybe he's already thinking ahead. And by actually bringing in normalization with Saudi Arabia, which is a huge deal here in Israeli, let's say, political landscape, this could be a good platform for him to go on a new elections. So
it's a risk, but he may take that risk. After all, he's not going to be there forever anyway. Exactly. Elections are scheduled for next year. Right. If they happen this year, it is no longer a matter of political collapse.
Exactly.
Having said all this, and here the contradiction lies in the fact that the same administration is also deeply committed to having Hamas removed from power in Gaza. In fact, Trump is talking about having the Gazans removed from Gaza, but frankly, if you want my opinion, when we meet again and again in the next few months, we're going to find out this is not happening. Egypt will not take, we take the sick and wounded. It may take some of the leaders if they decide to leave, but it will not take a mass of Gazans into Sinai under any circumstances. It is an essential aspect of being Egyptian. Yeah. Jordan can certainly not handle any more restive Palestinians than it has already. So That's not going to happen. But how do you get rid of Hamas?
But Eran, before we go into that, I think you have touched the most important thing. If we put, let's say, all the issues in terms of priorities, I think Iran is the top priority.
Absolutely.
For not only for Israel, also for the Saudi Arabia. So here there is,
and for the world,
and for the world,
as we keep saying,
for the United States.
If the NPT wall collapses in Iran,
that would be very bad.
The consequences.
So here, I'm sure this will be also on top of the agenda in terms of importance, maybe not in terms of urgency at this point, but certainly in terms of importance between Netanyahu and Trump. And here we know Trump would like to actually close up fronts. He doesn't want to open new fronts. So I would say the conventional wisdom is that he would opt firstly to a political course. That means telling the Iranians, okay, you have to shut down your illegal program. Now, the question is, are the Iranians going to do it? Not unless they are really threatened with a major, club over them. So here, it seems like what Netanyahu would tell Trump, knowing very well that Trump does not favor, at this point, sending the American B-52s or B-2 into Iran, or not even supporting Israel's doing its Air Force, sending it over there, then he would say, okay, in order to convince Iran, we know it from the past, please, first and foremost, bring back the paralyzing sanctions, maximum pressure on Iran. Iran today is even in a less...
It's going to be easier than before.
Exactly.
Because Europe, the other major trading partner of Iran, is also deeply frustrated by Iranian actions, by Iranian positions, by repression at home. Even, a country like Sweden has realized that the Iranians are hiring gangsters to carry out terror attacks on Swedish soil. I mean, the Iranians are not exactly flavor of the month, except in Russia.
Except in Russia, maybe in China a little bit, and in North Korea. But here, I would say that also there is another factor, which is an internal factor, and that is the Iranian economy.
Yes,
is much more fragile and weaker than before. Also, I would say burgeoning, although we never know, some social unrest. We don't know yet, but we know that the regime, the Ayatollah's regime, is very fearful. We see how they are relaxing some of, their positions.
There's an opportunity there.
Exactly.
But here... I will not tell you where I heard it, but I heard that the IRGC has asked its own people, would they shoot demonstrators?
Yes.
And in the past, only a margin said no. And now a majority said no.
Yes. Yeah. No, we know
that means that the regime is deeply vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. So this is why I think maybe pressure, economic pressure could be more effective than before. Of course, coupled with a military threat.
Credible military threat, as they say.
And here, this could bring in, of course, the Iranians to the negotiation table. However, the question is, what will come out of the negotiation? Because we don't want to see the JCPOA of 2015 repeating. No, so here, I think...
I'm hopeful that this administration and, Rubio, Waltz, Hegseth, the key players... I don't know where the vice president comes in on this, because he's much more of an isolationist. But the key strategic players in the incoming administration,
what is the main threat for the isolationist?
Gabbard, who looks likely to be confirmed now that she probably has Collins and the hesitate Republicans with her.
What is one
they
of
are
the
all
best?
Anti-Iranian to the core.
Exactly, but there's also some, I would say, very selfish intrinsic American interest in stopping Iran. Why? Because as you mentioned before, if Iran becomes nuclear, and this is the end of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, then the real fear in the United States is that South America will become nuclear. Not only Argentina and Brazil, but just think of Cuba and Venezuela, which is right at the backyard.
Yeah.
So I think they are here with us. But again, I say, if we do have a negotiation with Iran, the result should be not only removing all the enriched uranium that they already piled up, a few hundred kilograms, but also removing the infrastructure which was not done before. That means all the centrifuges also should go out of Iran, and much heavier monitoring system.
And the ballistic missile system, which is already illegal under UN resolutions.
And also the subversion in the region, that they should stop financing and inspiring terror.
Specifically, well, of course, in Syria, they're out already. In Iraq, there's going to be growing pressure against the Iranian supported.
And in Syria as well, sure.
Syria itself.
And in Lebanon.
And now the interesting games now are being played in Lebanon.
Yes.
I've just seen that the American administration is now trying to make sure that Eran and his prime minister do not appoint a Hezbollah-favored finance minister.
Right.
That's in itself is interesting. Why should Hezbollah be interested in the finance ministry? It's because the Iranian money has dried up.
Absolutely.
And now they have to feed the Shia and to feed themselves
off
the Lebanese people. That, and the Houthis, of course, also need to be, let's say, deterred in a much more
effective way. So we know Iran and its axis is in a very vulnerable position. The question, of course, is whether I'm saying the collective we is the Western alliance, whether led by the United States, would continue and make sure that we take this opportunity of the vulnerability of Iran and its axis to really strategically change the situation for good. And in that case, whether the Iranians will be ready to first come back to the negotiation table, B, agree to the terms that will be forced on them, this could be a very good thing. But if not, then I think the only option would be a military option. And I believe here also Trump would be helpful in terms of supporting Israeli campaign, but also may participate actively. And to what you mentioned with Zarif, saying that, if the Iranians will be stupid enough to try to make a breakthrough, right, to a nuclear capability, then immediately we will have
to take action,
and we will take action with the Americans.
Yes,
so I think this is also high on the calculations of the Iranians.
Well, clearly the administration would love Israel to do it. Trump said it in his bizarre way. It would be nice if Israel does not have to strike, which is a way of posing himself as a peacemaker, but also a hardly veiled threat to the Iranians. Right. But that's his style. This is going to be the key issue. And actually, what it probably means for Israel is that we will have to shift our focus of attention for the next few months from the situation in Gaza, which means also we will have to accept a temporarily established governance by Hamas in Gaza, but we would be ready to pounce at a later point when necessary. Agreements extracted by pointing a gun to the head of our hostages do not bind us down the road.
Exactly.
The American administration would clearly understand this. I think that Trump has just watched, at the advice of his envoy, Witkoff, the terrible film that was made about the horrors of October 7th that most people cannot even watch to the end because it's so horrifying. Yeah. And he's apparently was shocked to the depth of his being. This administration wants to get rid of Hamas. Question is when and how.
Right.
And by the way, one of the key players in setting up a plan for when and how, would be Egypt. So if Trump and Netanyahu would leverage the demand for getting the Gazans out to Egypt, which the Egyptians reject, and then you can come back to the Egyptians and say, okay, fair enough. They don't come out of Gaza, but Hamas has to come out of Gaza. Help us with this. Don't allow a single bullet to go through your border into Gaza. For years, you've been negligent. This is the time to make a real difference.
I think Trump,
all of this is still at play.
Yeah, I think Trump, which is not given the benefit of having too much sophistication, may be very sophisticated, because his out of the blue idea of relocation of the Gazan people coming now before the second stage with the Hamas may be very, very much telling that there is another leverage over the Gazans. That means if you do not want relocation of the people of Gaza, then
let's get rid of Hamas.
Exactly. Then let's relocation Hamas. And we will have to wait.
That reminds me of what he just did with Mexico and Canada.
Exactly.
The image I use with people, and I think it is caught on, is Trump doesn't start his concert playing the piccolo. He comes in with the tuba.
On the trombones.
The blast from the tuba, and then let's have a conversation.
Yes, I would say yes. He starts his negotiation style to start with a very high bar, and then let's try to negotiate, and he mostly gets his stuff. But so we said, Iran, we know what should be the course, but in order to get to a normalization with Saudi Arabia, we need to finish the Gaza issue, the refugees, and of course, the relocation of Hamas from there. It's the interest not only of Israel, but also of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, because the Hamas is a mortal enemy of their leadership as well. So a lot of things on the table. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes.
Until the next time, I'm sure that next program, next month, we will have a lot to discuss, looking back at what has been happening, especially in Washington, between the meeting of the two leaders, Israeli and American. Thank you all for watching another program of Middle East Review from TV7 in Jerusalem.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7israelnews.com.